The September sun cast long shadows across NYU's Washington Square campus as I, Jack Harrison, made my way through the bustling crowd of students heading to their afternoon classes. As a junior majoring in theater, I was used to playing different roles, but I never expected that my acting skills would lead me into something quite like this. "Hey, Jack. Wait up." I turned to see Emma Watson, no relation to the actress, as she always had to clarify, running toward me, her honey blonde hair catching the sunlight. Emma was in several of my theater classes, and while we weren't close friends, I'd always admired her talent. She had this way of making every performance feel real, even in our most experimental productions. "Hey Emma," I smiled, slowing my pace. "If this is about the Shakespeare presentation, I promise I'll have my part memorized by." "It's not about that," she cut me off, fidgeting with the strap of her designer shoulder bag. "I actually have a business proposition for you." I raised an eyebrow. In my experience, business propositions from fellow theater students usually meant unpaid roles in student films or help with audition tapes. But something in Emma's voice made this feel different. "Let's grab coffee," she suggested, already steering me toward the Bean, the favorite hangout of NYU's theater crowd. This might take some explaining. 10 minutes later, we were seated in a quiet corner of the cafe, 2 steaming cups between us. Emma hadn't touched hers, instead focusing on methodically shredding a paper napkin into tiny pieces. "So," I prompted, "this proposition?" Emma took a deep breath. "How much do you know about method acting?" "Enough to know it's controversial," I replied cautiously. "Becoming the character off stage, living the role, all that stuff." "Why?" "I want to hire you," she said bluntly. "To pretend to be my boyfriend." I nearly choked on my coffee. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's not what you think," she rushed to explain. "It's just, you know Tyler Martinez?" Everyone in the theater department knew Tyler Martinez. Senior, incredibly talented, destined for Broadway according to most of our professors. He and Emma had been the department's power couple for almost 2 years until their very public breakup last spring. "He's dating Sophia Chin now," Emma continued, her voice tight. "They're playing the leads in the fall production, and I can't stand the way he looks at me with pity. Like I'm just sitting around pining for him." "And you want to make him jealous?" I asked, starting to understand where this was going. "Not exactly," she shook her head. "I want to show him I've moved on. That I'm happy. That I don't need his pity. And you're perfect for this." "Because I'm an actor." "Because you're good at subtle performances," she corrected. "You don't overplay roles. Plus, you're tall, attractive, and Tyler's always been a bit threatened by you since that standing ovation you got in Death of a Salesman last year." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. Emma Watson was objectively one of the most beautiful girls in our department, and definitely one of the most talented. The idea that she needed to hire someone to date her seemed absurd. "Why not date someone for real?" I asked. A flash of vulnerability crossed her face before she masked it. "Because real feelings are messy. This needs to be a performance. Clean, controlled, with clear boundaries and an exit strategy. I'm talking 2 months, maximum. Just long enough to establish that I'm not broken by the breakup. I'll pay you $200 a week. You want to pay me to pretend to be your boyfriend?" I repeated, still processing the absurdity of the situation. "Think of it as an acting job," she insisted. "An extended improvisation exercise. It'll be great practice for both of us. We'll need to create a believable relationship dynamic, maintain consistent character choices, develop natural-seeming intimate behaviors." "Intimate behaviors?" I interrupted, my voice cracking slightly. Emma rolled her eyes. "Hand-holding, casual touches, maybe the occasional kiss if the situation absolutely demands it. Nothing inappropriate." We'll establish clear boundaries and safe words if either of us gets uncomfortable. She pulled out a folder from her bag. Of course she had a folder prepared and laid out what appeared to be a contract. I've thought this through. We'll need to coordinate our schedules, plan our chance encounters, rehearse our story of how we got together. I stared at the contract, then back at Emma. The rational part of my brain was screaming that this was a terrible idea. That fake dating never worked out well, even in the romantic comedies Emma claimed to hate. That getting involved in someone else's revenge plot, because let's be honest, that's what this was, never ended well. But another part of me, maybe the actor, maybe just the idiot, was intrigued. Emma was right about one thing: it would be an acting challenge unlike anything I'd done before. A long-form improvisation with real stakes and a live audience who couldn't know they were watching a performance. Plus, if I was being honest with myself, I'd always been curious about Emma. Not romantically. I'd made it a rule never to date within the department after a disastrous freshman year experience. But there was something about her that fascinated me. The way she could switch her emotions on and off like a light switch during performances, yet somehow always made them feel genuine. The money's just a bonus, she added, misreading my hesitation. The real value is in the acting experience. Think about it, when else will you get the chance to develop a character over weeks, in real-world situations, with actual stakes? I picked up the contract, skimming its surprisingly detailed terms. Required public appearances, established boundaries, confidentiality clauses. Emma Watson didn't do anything halfway. What happens when the 2 months are up? I asked. We stage an amicable breakup, she replied promptly. Remain friends. Show everyone that mature adults can handle relationships ending without drama. It'll be the final proof that I'm completely over Tyler. I should have said no. Should have made up an excuse about being too busy with classes or having moral objections to deception. Instead, I heard myself say, "When do we start?" Emma's face lit up with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. There's a department party this Friday. Tyler and Sophia will be there. It's the perfect opportunity to begin establishing our relationship. As I signed the contract, because apparently this was my life now, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into something far more complicated than either of us realized. But hey, I was an actor. Complicated was what we did best. One more thing, Emma said as she carefully filed away the signed contract. We should probably practice kissing before Friday. You know, to make it look natural if we need to. She said it so casually, like she was suggesting we run lines or block a scene. But there was something in the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes that made me wonder if this really was just about making Tyler jealous. Right, I agreed, trying to match her professional tone. Because we're actors. And this is just another performance. Exactly, she nodded, finally looking up at me. Just a performance. Neither of us mentioned that the best performances always had an element of truth to them. Or that the line between acting and reality had a way of blurring when you least expected it. As we left the coffee shop, I couldn't help but think that I'd just signed up for either the most interesting role of my career or the biggest mistake of my life. Possibly both. Little did I know, Emma Watson was about to teach me that sometimes the most convincing performances are the ones we put on for ourselves. Part 2, the performance. Relax your shoulders, Emma whispered, her fingers lightly brushing my arm as we stood outside the entrance to the cutting room, where the theater department's fall kickoff party was in full swing. You look like you're about to audition for a Greek tragedy. She wasn't wrong. Despite our rehearsal sessions over the past 3 days, which had consisted mainly of establishing our fake relationship's backstory and practicing casual physical contact, I still felt stiff. Maybe because I knew Tyler and Sophia were already inside, or maybe because Emma's perfume was making it hard to remember this was all just an act. Sorry, I mumbled, consciously loosening my posture. Just getting into character. Emma's laugh was genuine, a sound I'd grown to distinguish from her performance laugh during our practice sessions. This isn't Stanislavski, Jack. We're just two people who've been quietly falling for each other over summer theater workshops. Right. Our carefully crafted backstory. Simple enough to be believable, complicated enough to be interesting. We'd spent hours perfecting the details, how I'd helped her with her monologues, how she'd brought me coffee during late rehearsals, how one thing had led to another. "Ready?" she asked, sliding her hand into mine. Her fingers were cold despite the warm September evening. I squeezed her hand reassuringly, surprised by how natural it felt. Ready. The party was exactly what you'd expect from a bunch of theater students, dramatically lit, overtly theatrical, and full of people trying very hard to look like they weren't trying at all. Emma's grip tightened as we spotted Tyler and Sophia holding court near the makeshift stage. "Breathe," I reminded her, and felt her exhale against my shoulder. "Emma." "Jack." Madison Lee, a sophomore who worshipped Emma, rushed over to us. Her eyes dropped to our joined hands, widened, then lit up with barely contained glee. "Oh. My. God. Are you too?" Emma leaned into me, a perfectly practiced movement that looked completely spontaneous. "We're taking things slow," she said, her voice soft but carrying just enough to draw attention from nearby groups. "Right, Jack?" I looked down at her, remembering her coaching. "Don't just act like you're in love with me. Act like you're trying to hide how much you're in love with me." It was the kind of nuanced direction that made Emma such a compelling performer. "Right," I agreed, letting my voice warm with affection. "Some things are worth taking time with." Madison was practically vibrating with excitement. I could almost see the text messages spreading through the department's gossip network. Mission accomplished. We made our way through the party, a carefully choreographed dance of casual touches and meaningful glances. Emma was brilliant at it, naturally. She had this way of looking at me like I was the only person in the room, then glancing away as if catching herself. It was the kind of subtle performance that won awards. The problem was, I was starting to forget it was a performance. "Jack Harrison," Tyler's voice cut through my thoughts. "I didn't know you did summer theater." He stood before us, Sophia at his side, both of them radiating the kind of confident energy that came from being the leads in both the upcoming production and real life. "There's a lot you don't know about Jack," Emma replied before I could speak, her tone light but with an undercurrent I couldn't quite read. Her hand slipped from mine to rest on my lower back, a possessive gesture we hadn't rehearsed. Tyler's eyes narrowed slightly. "Clearly. How long has this been going on?" "We'd rather not put a timeline on it," I said, falling into the role of protective new boyfriend. "When something feels right, you know." Sophia shifted uncomfortably, but Tyler held his ground. "Funny, I didn't think you dated within the department, Jack. Wasn't that your big rule?" "Rules change," Emma interjected, reaching up to straighten my collar in a gesture that looked intimate enough to make both Tyler and Sophia take a step back. "When you meet the right person." The tension was broken by the arrival of Professor Chen, announcing the start of the fall production's cast introductions. As Tyler and Sophia moved away to take their places on stage, Emma's hand trembled slightly against my back. "You okay?" I whispered. "Perfect," she replied, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "He's totally buying it." For some reason, her answer bothered me. Maybe because I was starting to buy it myself. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm we hadn't exactly rehearsed but somehow perfected. Coffee dates between classes, study sessions in the library that involved more whispering and laughing than actual studying, casual PDAs that always seemed to happen just when the right people were watching. Emma was meticulous about maintaining our story's authenticity. "Details matter," she'd say as she casually dropped references to my coffee order in conversations, or wore the scarf I'd supposedly given her but had actually carefully selected from her own collection. The lines between performance and reality began to blur. I found myself reaching for her hand even when no one was watching, saving funny memes to share with her during our staged study sessions, genuinely laughing at her terrible puns. Worse, I started noticing things. Important things. Like how her nose scrunched up when she was truly concentrating, different from the elegant furrow she affected during our public study sessions. Or how she had two different laughs, the musical one she used for our performances, and a snorting giggle that only came out when she was too tired to maintain character. "You're staring again," she murmured one afternoon as we sat in our usual spot in the library, visible enough to be seen but far enough away to speak privately. "Just staying in character," I replied, but we both knew I was lying. The problem with method acting is that sometimes the emotion bleeds through. You're supposed to use your real feelings to fuel the performance, but you're not supposed to let the performance create real feelings. I was failing miserably at maintaining that distinction. Everything came to a head during the department's first workshop performance of the semester. Emma and I were watching from the back row as Tyler and Sophia performed a scene from The Way of the World. They were good, of course they were good, but something about their chemistry felt off. "They're pushing too hard," Emma whispered, her theater-trained voice carrying no further than my ear. "Trying to force the connection instead of letting it develop naturally. Unlike us." I whispered back, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. She turned to look at me, really look at me, for the first time in what felt like weeks. "Jack." "Ms. Watson, Mr. Harrison," Professor Chen's voice cut through the darkness. "Perhaps you'd like to show us how it's done." A spotlight suddenly found us, and the entire workshop class turned in their seats. Tyler and Sophia stood frozen on stage, their scene interrupted. Emma stood gracefully, every inch the consummate performer. "Of course, Professor." I followed her to the stage, my heart pounding. We hadn't rehearsed this. We hadn't even discussed the possibility of performing together since starting our fake relationship. "The balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet," Professor Chen announced. "I trust you both know it." Of course we knew it. Every theater student knew it. But as Emma took her position on the makeshift balcony and I stepped into the shadows below, I realized this was different from any performance I'd ever given. Because when I looked up at Emma, backlit by the stage lights, I didn't have to act. Every word of Romeo's desperate love came naturally, fueled by weeks of pretending not to feel exactly what Romeo was professing. Emma's Juliet was perfect, of course it was perfect, but there was something else there too. Something in the way her voice caught on certain lines, the way her hands trembled as she reached toward me. The scene ended with thunderous applause, but I barely heard it. All I could focus on was the look in Emma's eyes as she fled the stage. I found her in the prop room, surrounded by fake flowers and plastic swords. "Emma. Don't," she said, her voice shaking. "That was just another performance." Was it? It had to be. She wouldn't look at me. "This is all just a performance, remember? That's what we agreed to." I took a step closer. "What if I don't want it to be?" Before she could answer, the prop room door burst open. Tyler stood there, his face unreadable. "Emma, can we talk?" "Alone?" The irony wasn't lost on me. This was exactly what we'd been working toward: Tyler's jealousy, his realization of what he'd lost. But as Emma glanced between us, her face a mask of confusion, I realized something terrible. I was jealous too. Part 3, The Complications. I spent the next hour pacing outside the prop room, ignoring curious glances from passing students. Every fiber of my theatrical training screamed at me to burst in there, to create a dramatic confrontation worthy of a Tennessee Williams play. Instead, I did what I never thought I'd do in a crucial dramatic moment: I walked away. The autumn air hit my face like a wake-up call as I pushed through the theater building's heavy doors. What was I doing? This wasn't part of the script. Falling for Emma Watson wasn't in the contract we'd signed in that coffee shop, which now felt like a lifetime ago. My phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Need to raincheck tonight's study session. Things are complicated. Three dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, then finally. Thank you for understanding. I wasn't understanding. I wasn't understanding at all. The next few days were a masterclass in avoidance. Emma and I maintained our public couple persona when necessary, but something had shifted. Her touches felt mechanical, her smiles didn't reach her eyes. We were giving the kind of performance we'd criticized Tyler and Sophia for pushing too hard, forcing the connection. Trouble in paradise? Madison asked during our stage combat class, where I just messed up a basic sequence for the third time. What? No, I replied too quickly. Everything's perfect. Madison gave me a look that said she'd been in enough productions to recognize bad acting. Right. That's why Emma's been having secret meetings with Tyler, and you're trying to murder our practice dummies. My practice sword clattered to the ground. Secret meetings? Oh God, you didn't know. Madison's hand flew to her mouth. I thought. I mean, they're just running lines. For the spring production. Tyler's helping her prepare for auditions. Running lines. The oldest excuse in the theater department playbook. I'd used it myself freshman year when I wanted to spend extra time with Sarah Chin, no relation to the professor. The memory of how that ended with a dramatic public breakup that had led to my no dating in the department rule didn't help my current state of mind. I picked up my sword, forcing my voice to stay casual. Of course I knew. We don't have to tell each other everything. We trust each other. Madison's skeptical look followed me for the rest of class. That evening, I found myself at the Bean, sitting at the same table where this whole charade had started. My coffee had gone cold, but I barely noticed, too busy staring at the contract Emma had given me. 2 months, it specified. We were only halfway through. Is this seat taken? I looked up to find Sophia Chen standing there, looking uncomfortable but determined. Without waiting for my response, she sat down. We need to talk about Emma and Tyler. My grip tightened on my cup. There's nothing to talk about. Really? Sophia arched an eyebrow. So you're completely fine with them spending hours together in the practice rooms? With all their whispered conversations that stop when anyone else approaches? With the way they look at each other during production meetings? Each word felt like a physical blow, but I maintained my composition. 3 years of acting training had to be good for something. Emma and I trust each other, I repeated my earlier lie. Like I trusted Tyler. Sophia's voice cracked slightly. You know what the worst part is? He still has feelings for her. He probably always did. I was just convenient. The right person at the right time to make him feel better about their breakup. I stared at her, really seeing her for the first time. Behind the confident exterior of the department's leading lady was someone just as lost and hurt as I was. Why are you telling me this? Sophia's laugh was bitter. Because misery loves company. Because I'm tired of pretending everything's fine. Because maybe if you fight for her, you'll have better luck than I did with him. It's not that simple, I said, thinking of the contract sitting in my bag. It never is. Sophia stood up. But at least my relationship with Tyler was real, even if it wasn't right. Can you say the same about yours? She left me there, drowning in cold coffee and uncomfortable truths. My phone buzzed again, another text from Emma. Can we meet? Our usual spot in the library. It's important. I stared at the message for a long moment. Our usual spot. The place where I'd first noticed her real laugh, where I'd started to forget we were acting, where I'd begun to fall for her despite every rational thought in my head. On my way, I replied, even as every instinct told me to run in the opposite direction. The library was quiet when I arrived, most students already gone for dinner. Emma sat at our table, illuminated by the soft glow of the desk lamp. She looked beautiful, but then she always looked beautiful. It was part of what made this whole thing so difficult. Tyler wants to get back together, she said without preamble as I sat down. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. This was what we'd wanted, wasn't it? The whole point of our elaborate charade? So why did it feel like someone had punched me in the gut? What did you say? I managed to ask, proud of how steady my voice remained. I told him I needed time to think. She wouldn't meet my eyes. He said watching me with you made him realize what he'd thrown away. That seeing how happy I was made him understand his mistake. Are you? I asked quietly. Happy? Finally, she looked at me, and there was something in her eyes I couldn't read. I don't know anymore. This whole thing, it's gotten so complicated. Because of Tyler. Because of you. The words burst out of her like she couldn't hold them back anymore. Because you're supposed to be just another actor in this production, but instead you're. She trailed off, and I found myself holding my breath, waiting for her to finish that sentence. But Emma Watson, who never forgot a line in her life, seemed to have lost her words. I'm what? I prompted softly. Instead of answering, she pulled out her own copy of our contract, the pages worn from repeated handling. 2 months, she said, her voice barely a whisper. We agreed to 2 months. No complications, no real feelings, just a performance. Emma. I can't do this anymore, she cut me off, standing abruptly. Tyler was right. This whole thing was a mistake. We need to end it. End what? I asked, standing too. The fake relationship or the real one we've been pretending doesn't exist. Her sharp intake of breath told me I'd hit a nerve. There is no real relationship, Jack. That's the point. It's all been an act. A performance. That's what we're good at, remember? That's why I chose you. Is that really why you chose me? For a moment, I thought I saw her facade crack, but then her actor's training took over. The contract is void, she said, her voice professional and distant. I'll pay you for the full 2 months, of course, but we're done. Tomorrow we'll announce an amicable breakup, just like we planned. And then you'll get back together with Tyler. I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. That's none of your business anymore. She gathered her things quickly, efficiently. Thank you for your services, Jack. You played your part perfectly. She left me standing there in the library, surrounded by books full of tragic love stories that suddenly felt a lot more realistic than they had in my acting classes. My phone buzzed one final time, a notification that Emma Watson had just transferred the remaining balance of our contract to my account. I'd just been paid for my last performance as Emma Watson's fake boyfriend. Too bad it was the only role I'd ever played that I wished was real. Part 4, The Truth. The next 2 weeks were a blur of awkward encounters and avoided gazes. True to her word, Emma had announced our mutual and amicable breakup through the theater department's grapevine. The story was perfect, 2 friends who tried dating and realized they were better off as colleagues. Simple, clean, believable. It was also completely false. You look terrible, Madison informed me during our weekly coffee run. Like, understudy just got called up on opening night. Terrible. Thanks, I muttered, staring into my cup as if it might contain answers instead of just overpriced caffeine. And the weird thing is, she continued, ignoring my sarcasm, Emma looks just as bad. Which doesn't make sense if she's so happy to be back with Tyler. My head snapped up. What do you mean, back with Tyler? Madison's eyes widened. You haven't heard? They're not officially together, but everyone's talking about how they're always in the practice rooms together, and yesterday they... I have to go, I cut her off, standing abruptly. I couldn't hear this. Didn't want to imagine Emma and Tyler together, recreating their perfect theater department romance while I sat here nursing cold coffee and regrets. But Madison grabbed my arm. Wait. There's something else you should know. She hesitated. Sophia dropped out of the fall production yesterday. Apparently, she and Tyler had this huge fight during rehearsal. Something about him not being honest about his feelings. I waited for this information to make me feel better after all. Wasn't this exactly what Emma had wanted? Tyler realizing his mistake, his relationship with Sophia falling apart. Instead, I just felt hollow. It doesn't matter, I said, pulling away from Madison's grip. It was all just an act anyway. But as I walked across campus, my feet carried me to the one place I'd been avoiding, the practice room where Emma and I had spent countless hours rehearsing our fake relationship. Through the small window in the door, I could see her sitting at the piano, her fingers hovering over the keys but not playing. Before I could stop myself, I opened the door. Emma jumped at the sound, her hands falling to her lap. Jack. What are you doing here? I don't know, I admitted. Apparently, I'm really bad at following stage directions. Especially the one about making a dignified exit. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You always did prefer improvisation to scripted scenes. Yeah, well, look where that got me. I moved further into the room, letting the door close behind me. I heard about Tyler and Sophia. Emma's posture stiffened. It's not what you think. Isn't it? Tyler's single, you're single, it's the perfect third act resolution. The leads get back together, everyone lives happily ever after. Is that what you think I want? I don't know what you want, Emma. The words burst out louder than I'd intended, echoing in the small room. I thought I did. I thought I was starting to understand the real you, beneath all the performances. But maybe that was just another role you were playing. She stood up so quickly the piano bench scraped against the floor. You don't get to do this. You don't get to act hurt when this was exactly what we agreed to. A performance with a clear end date. No, I stepped closer, my voice dropping. What we agreed to was pretending to date to make Tyler jealous. We didn't agree to. To what? To me falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between us, too real, too raw. Emma's face went through a series of emotions too quick to track before settling on something that looked like fear. You're not in love with me, she said, but her voice wavered. You're just a really good actor. That's the thing, I laughed bitterly. I'm not. Not when it comes to this. Every smile, every laugh, every moment with you, those weren't performed. They were real. And I think some of yours were too. Stop. She held up her hands as if to ward off my words. Please, just stop. Why? Because it's not in the script. Because it complicates your perfect reunion with Tyler. Because there isn't going to be a reunion with Tyler. Her voice cracked on the last word. Because he wanted to get back together and I said no. Because every time he looks at me now, all I can think about is how different it feels from when you look at me. I froze. What? Emma sank back onto the piano bench, all her careful composure crumbling. Do you know why I really ended our contract early? It wasn't because of Tyler. It was because I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Every time you smiled at me, every time you held my hand, I couldn't remember if it was part of the act or if it meant something. And that terrified me. Why? Because I don't do real. She gestured frantically. I do performances. Controlled, scripted, safe performances where everyone knows their lines and their marks and nobody's heart gets broken. I moved closer, kneeling in front of her. Emma. Don't, she whispered, but she didn't pull away when I took her hands in mine. Tell me this isn't real, I said softly. Look me in the eyes, use all your acting training, and tell me that none of it was real. That you never felt anything genuine during our performance. Do that, and I'll walk away right now. She met my gaze, and I could see her trying to summon her actor's mask. But something cracked in her expression, and suddenly she was crying, not the elegant, staged tears I'd seen her perfect for roles, but messy, real tears that smudged her makeup. "I can't," she managed between sobs. "I can't, because somewhere between all the fake dates and rehearsed kisses and staged moments, I started wishing they were real. And that's not what was supposed to happen." I reached up to brush away her tears, my hand shaking slightly. Maybe that's exactly what was supposed to happen. Maybe sometimes the best performances are the ones that turn into reality. She laughed wetly. "That's terrible dialogue. Professor Chen would be ashamed." "I'm improvising here," I smiled. "And you still haven't given me my cue." Emma looked at me for a long moment, then took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was completely unguarded for the first time since I'd known her. "I think I'm in love with you too," she whispered. "And it's not part of the performance." I leaned forward, our foreheads touching. "So what happens now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "We didn't rehearse this part." "Maybe," I suggested, "we stop rehearsing and just live it instead." Her answer was to close the distance between us in a kiss that felt nothing like our carefully choreographed ones. It was messy and imperfect and completely, utterly real. When we finally pulled apart, Emma's eyes were shining with something that definitely wasn't staged emotion. "You know what this means, right? That we're officially the biggest cliché in the theater department?" "That too," she laughed. "But I meant, this is terrifying. Real feelings, no script, no safety net." I tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, marveling at how different it felt to do it because I wanted to rather than because blocking required it. Good thing we're both trained in improvisation. The sound of voices in the hallway reminded us where we were. Emma quickly wiped her eyes, but made no move to put distance between us. "Everyone's going to talk." "Let them," I said. "We're theater people. Talking is what we do best." "True," she smiled. "Though I should warn you, Tyler's going to be insufferable when he realizes he was right about us having real feelings for each other." I froze. "Wait, what?" Emma's guilty expression told me there was still more to this story than I knew. But before I could ask, the practice room door burst open, revealing Madison, whose eyes went wide at the scene before her. "Oh. My. God." Part 5, the encore. Madison's dramatic entrance was followed by an even more dramatic exit as she practically sprinted down the hallway, no doubt eager to spread the latest development in the ongoing theater department soap opera. Emma and I looked at each other and burst out laughing. "Well," she sighed, "I guess we're about to become the main attraction again." Speaking of which, I helped her up from the piano bench, keeping her hand in mine. "What did you mean about Tyler knowing about our real feelings?" Emma's face flushed. "Remember that conversation we had in the prop room? After our Romeo and Juliet scene? The one where Tyler interrupted us? Kind of hard to forget." "He didn't actually want to get back together," she admitted. "He wanted to talk about you. About us. He said he could see it in our performance, the way we looked at each other when we thought no one was watching. The little moments that couldn't be scripted." I stared at her. "So when you said he wanted to reconcile?" "I panicked," she confessed. "It was easier to pretend he wanted me back than to admit he'd seen right through our act." "Through my act?" "He knew before I did that what I felt for you was real. That's why Sophia was so angry," I realized. "Not because Tyler wanted you back, but because he was trying to play matchmaker." Emma nodded. "He felt guilty about how things ended between us, and he thought helping me find real happiness might make up for it. Even Sophia was in on it, eventually. That's why she came to talk to you at the Bean." "Wait." I dropped her hand, my mind racing. "Are you telling me that while we were pretending to date to make Tyler jealous, he was actually orchestrating events to make us realize we had real feelings for each other?" "Pretty much." Emma bit her lip. "Are you mad?" I should have been. It was manipulative, complicated, exactly the kind of dramatic plot twist that would feel contrived on stage. Instead, I found myself laughing. What's so funny? I managed between chuckles. This whole situation. You hired me to help you act out a fake relationship to make your ex jealous, but he was actually helping us stumble into a real relationship. It's like something out of one of those student-written experimental plays Professor Chen is always complaining about. Emma's laughter joined mine, echoing in the small practice room. God, you're right. No one would believe this plot if we put it on stage. Too many twists. Too many layers of performance and reality. She stepped closer, her hands finding my chest. Though I have to admit, the ending is pretty satisfying. Is it the ending? I raised an eyebrow. Or just the beginning of Act 2? Her answer was interrupted by the door bursting open again, this time revealing Tyler, Sophia, and what appeared to be half the theater department. Finally! Tyler exclaimed, grinning broadly. Do you know how exhausting it's been watching you two dance around your feelings? Almost as exhausting as helping you orchestrate this whole thing, Sophia added, but she was smiling too. Emma turned to face our audience, her hand finding mine again. You all knew. Please, Madison scoffed from somewhere in the crowd. Your fake relationship had better chemistry than most of the real couples in the department. The way you looked at each other during that Romeo and Juliet scene, someone else chimed in. That wasn't acting. Even Professor Chen noticed, Tyler added. Why do you think she called you up to perform that day? She was tired of watching you two pretend you weren't falling in love. I looked at Emma, seeing the same mix of embarrassment and amusement on her face that I felt on mine. So basically, we were the only ones who didn't know we were falling in love? Speak for yourself, she replied softly. I knew. I was just too scared to admit it. And now? She turned to face me fully, ignoring our impromptu audience. Now I'm more scared of not admitting it. This kiss wasn't performed for anyone's benefit. It wasn't carefully choreographed or strategically timed. It was just us, being real, being true, being in love. The applause that erupted around us was genuine too, accompanied by cheers and a few theatrical sobs. Theater students will be theater students, after all. All right, clear the room, Tyler's voice cut through the chaos. Give the lead some privacy for their big finale. As our friends filed out, with Madison already typing furiously on her phone and Sophia herding the stragglers, Tyler paused at the door. Just so you know, he said, this was a much better performance than anything we could have planned. When we were finally alone again, Emma looked up at me with that real smile I'd grown to recognize and love. So, Mr. Harrison, now that we've established this isn't a performance anymore, what's next? I pretended to think about it. Well, I did have this rule about not dating within the department. Ah, but rules change, she quoted my words from that first party, when you meet the right person. The right person, I agreed, pulling her closer. No acting required. 6 months later, when Emma and I were cast as the leads in the spring production, Professor Chen pulled us aside after the first rehearsal. Try to tone down the chemistry a bit, she advised with a knowing smile. This is supposed to be a tragedy, not a love story. But we couldn't help it. Whether on stage or off, our love had become the one thing we never had to perform. Emma still teases me about the contract sometimes. It's framed in our shared dorm room now, a reminder of how the best love stories often start with a script but end with pure improvisation. And Tyler? He got the last laugh after all. At the drama department's end-of-year awards, he won Best Director for what he called his greatest production, The Real Fake Romance of Emma and Jack. We didn't mind. Some performances are worth being upstaged for.